So I got to be kind of quiet, and that means I'm gonna be kind of quiet. And I apologize if I made it a little harder than normal to understand. But anyway, I got this kind of prompt from this Ben, one of the Bens, and he's asking us about learning and failure. And this kind of crystallized a lot of ideas I've been thinking about. And I don't know, this is not going to be like super polished, but I want you to maybe listen to this like it's a rough draft, even though, who are we kidding? I'm not going to do it again. So there's this prelude, right? So that I want to talk to like my younger self. And I had this interesting thing, and I got my notes here, just so you know. That's why am I looking over here? It's because my notes are right there. Right there. So I was in college, and for the first time, it was a big story, lots of complicated details I'm not going to have time for right here, but I had just kind of like failed my first physics exam. And this was very surprising to me because, in high school, they like let me plan to study chaos theory on my own and teach my friend. They had no idea what I was going to do. And then all of a sudden, I'm like just a failure in the college. So, this professor tries to explain to me, like, as a physics person, you need to learn to like calculate things efficiently and you don't derive everything from Newton's like three principles. And all of this, like now looking back, I could have been a mathematician. And in fact, that's what I decided to do. I studied math and computer science. So that was a good move. But I didn't really understand it. I was like, I must screw up. It's just, a different way of doing stuff, not really physics type. And so, yeah, but that is like maybe some non sequitur, right? It's a prelude to get you in a kind of emotional state, maybe. And then what I want to talk about is like, you look at the martial arts, right? And people talk about like this Chinese kind of style. You got like the good, bad, or right, wrong kind of, way of teaching. And, at the extreme other end of that is something I got very interested in, which was the Feldenkrais. Um, he was like all about making these very careful opportunities where you could figure stuff out for yourself. And he never tell you what's right or wrong. He's like, you would figure it out. It's a little puzzle. And so you always have to have the tools to like be able to tell, like, is this better or worse or harder or easier? And that's a very interesting way of teaching also. But all of that stuff is like the teacher has some goal, and that's really different than something else I really like a lot, which is the contact improvisation, right? So that's like, you don't even need to have a goal, maybe, or your goal is like some kind of sort of higher order goal, which sort of enacts a kind of unfolding of kind of joint activity through kind of shared attention and stuff like that, So anyway, there's this extreme at the end. Like, it's not like you have your own goals. It's like, in some sense, you don't have a goal. You're like surprised, like, oh, I did this thing. It was really cool. Or I was like kind of not very fun. And I did it for an hour and I don't know why. Like all this could happen in an improv. So how do you fail when you do an improv, right? And, I had this other thing in my notes, and I feel like this is all over the place, right? But we're thinking about learning and like figuring out like what's the right way to practice like a martial art. And an interesting thing is that judo, which Feldenkrais is, that's how he studied initially, and aikido and shintaido, there are all these Japanese kind of martial arts that were a response to the nuclear bomb, and that question of how do you train to defend your home in a world where an entire city can be glassed by one guy push a button. It's a pretty tough question, right? And it's a very different kind of goal, right? You're kind of doing the same thing. You're practicing the martial arts, and like all of a sudden this external thing comes, and you're like, oh, well, that's different, So And I guess the answer, how do you screw that up? Like, it better not, right? So, anyway, all these different ways, like, how do you make a mistake? You have to have the goal. And then you make a mistake. But, like, what is the goal? That's a choice. That's a pedagogical choice, right? So you're always going to make mistakes that are defined relative to the goal, but you always got this choice of, like, how to define the goal. And so let's see, moving on, I set that up, and of course, I'm going to talk about Seymour Papert because he's so cool, and he studied with, like, Piaget, and he understood computers and stuff, and, what did he do in the end? He, like, made some funny little games for kids to, like, draw flowers and stuff. That was, like, the deep idea, right? I want to help kids use a computer to draw a flower. So the crazy thing is, right, he had this thing, it was called logo. He just made this turtle. He, like, goes around in a circle or whatever. You tell it, put the pen down and walk, 7 paces and turns left, and, he draws what you tell him to draw. So using this approach, he's able to train, apparently. I actually have to find the paper. If you have the paper, put it in the comments. I think the comments will be down here, but maybe it's over there. I don't know. Certainly not up there. So anyway, he was able to train in some paper these 8th graders to have better intuitions about physics of linked bodies, right? So you got, like, a monkey on a string and a pulley hanging onto some other monkey, and they're both climbing around, like, what happens kind of question. These 8th graders, they were better at that kind of thing than MIT freshmen who had completed their first year of physics, and MIT, their physics is not a joke. I mean, sometimes the teachers are very good and they're funny. I'm not saying they're not funny. But they're not Seymour Papert either. So, it's, again, this question, you take something so serious and rule-like and, like, mathematical and stuff, and you say, like, well, there you have to have very clear goals. You have to have very, very, rigorous tests. So people know, like, oh, you screwed up, or you're not fast enough, or you didn't get this clever trick, or whatever, right? It's like, no, they're going to draw a flower. Or, like, eventually they got, a couple turtles, monkeys, whatever, and they just tell them, like, hey, swing on this rope or whatever to see if it's cool, right? So that's a very powerful thing. I think that's a very powerful thing. And the interesting thing, so I'm always telling people, I get this book, Mindstorms. In the middle, there's a beautiful little story. It's a transcript of these kids, and you see the programs they're writing, and you see what it draws, and you see what they talk about. And they're trying to draw a flower. A flower. Sorry, sometimes my English pronunciation is not so good. And so they screw up. And the one kid is like, oh, look, it's like a bird. Why don't we save that procedure for later? And then we can have a flower, and then we can have some birds. They can fly around. Right, so in this moment, right, and this happens in other improvisational situations as well. Oh my goodness. My battery is going to die. Isn't that funny? So let me turn down the brightness on this screen. So the entire notion of a mistake transforms when you're in an improvisational setting, right? The mistake might be the most interesting thing you do. You might learn more from that than anything else. And that's always the case, right? But it doesn't feel that way when you're doing other kinds of things. And I think that's very important, is how it feels. Because that's actually going to shape the way the memories are formed. And that's not a trivial thing. Like, if it's a pleasant thing and you're like, oh, it's fun to figure stuff out and see new things, that's very different than, like, oh, I screwed up, I gotta, like, just clench my teeth and, do another 100, whatever, simplify some integrals. So two things. The most fundamental thing is learning how to learn, right? And this is what I'm pointing to, right? It's like, how do you feel? How do you train yourself to feel a certain way about a mistake? And that learning how to learn is a skill that opens a path to all the other skills. You can learn whatever. If you learn how to like take something apart and explore and find the little pieces and hang on to things and assemble them later, that is it. That is the skill. The other thing is learning how to help others learn, right? And then if you learn this, you expand your abilities, right, to an exceptional degree. You don't need to do it all by yourself. And I want to join you in learning about your home. Maybe together we may be stronger in defending our shared home. And maybe that's really important. Maybe we can screw that up. And that's a lot of work, and I'm going to kind of just read something here. It's hard to get paid for it, but it's important. For me, I had a child, and like nothing has motivated me like this. You should maybe not have a child to motivate you, but maybe you already have a kid, or you want son, have a good reason to have a kid, and you have this opportunity to spend time with a kid, maybe even if you didn't, produce it, so to speak. All these situations, you did it, and you're kind of the master for a while. You're the expert human. This kid is going to get transmission from you, not just like what you tell him, but he's going to like just soak up everything you do. And me, I want to learn to be a good teacher. And it's really hard when you're in that relationship, because you can't just say stuff. You kind of have to live your lessons, and you make mistakes a lot. And it's, for me, I have to admit, despite everything I just said, sometimes it's still painful. But sometimes, man, oh man, it's the best.